Coming up, a Rosebud Sioux citizen is being elevated in the financial sector. And we join Indigenous canoeists who are on a journey retracing the continent's original highways. Plus, we share one woman's message about trusting your inner voice when pregnant. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
Thank you for joining us. We start today in Alaska, where a state contamination lawsuit against the federal government has been dismissed due to a lack of Indigenous support. Last year, a lawsuit from the state of Alaska claimed the Department of the Interior is liable for contaminated land that was given to Alaska Native corporations in 1971. The case, filed by the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, cites the responsibility and failure of DOI to clean up the land given to tribal nations within the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. However, this past July, a federal district court judge dismissed the case after no Alaska Native corporations or groups supported it. In its complaint, the state argued that 3 prior acts of Congress made in 1990, 1995, and 2014 set guidelines for the DOI to come up with cleanup plans for contaminated sites. According to DOI attorneys, they did come up with the plans, but they just aren't required to implement them. Judge Holland agreed, citing that by law, the DOI is under no directive to put those plans into action. In a written statement by Alaska state officials, plans to appeal the case are under consideration. A national organization dedicated to building Native American political power is encouraging Indigenous leaders to run for local offices. According to Advanced Native Political Leadership, there are over 519,000 elected officials in the United States. 96% of those positions are in local offices, ranging from school boards and water commissions to city councils. Advance recently started a series for Indigenous people to learn about running for school boards. Here is part of the conversation with Dawn Marie Johnson, who is a school board member in Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
The awareness that only 40% of our Native American students are graduating on time is something that needs to be talked about. I mean, most people don't really know that, and during the campaign, when I would share that, they'd be like, what are we doing for this? How can I help? So even just bringing awareness to it was really important during that election time, to just get people talking about it, get people engaged in conversation when normally that wasn't something that was brought up.
Many organizers cite Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota and White Earth Ojibwe citizen Peggy Flanagan as an example. At 25 years old, she became the youngest person elected to serve on the Minneapolis School Board. Advance says school board members can make a difference, from promoting Native culture in schools to advocating for culturally relevant teaching lessons. A historic TV show will launch its 3rd and final season. Reservation Dogs will return to screens on Wednesday, August 2nd for its highly anticipated ending. The show has been showered with awards, including the 2022 American Film Institute Awards, a Peabody, a Gotham Award, and 2 Independent Spirit Awards. The last season had already been written and recorded when the Screenwriters Guild went on strike in the spring. That means the 3rd and final season faced no delays from the actions. When co-creators of the series, Sterling Harjo and Taika Waititi, announced the end of the show, they said it has been a dream to show the world a different perspective of Indigenous people. You can find the new adventures of the Res Dogs on FX and Hulu on August 2nd. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. In mid-July, Dawson Herr Many Horses was named managing director at Wells Fargo. It marks a rare moment for an Indigenous person to be promoted to such a position at a major U.S. bank. I sat down with him recently to talk about his new role and about how tribal communities are being overlooked by investors. Dawson, thank you so much for joining us on the ICT Newscast.
Thanks for having me.
You have been named the managing director of Wells Fargo. Tell us exactly the duties and responsibilities of a role like this.
Yeah, managing director in finance is one of the highest titles that you can get. I think it's kind of a recognition of certainly of seniority, but there's a lot of expectations of folks with that title. I think managing directors are people who've been identified as people who are good kind of carriers of culture of an organization, right? Who promote and represent kind of what an organization aspires to be and kind of wants their employees to be. And so I think, this title is a recognition of that, but it's also just a responsibility, right? It's a reflection of kind of duties and things that, we do as bankers in finance.
Can you provide some context into how many Native Americans have been elevated to a role like this before you?
It's a great question. And I think a friend of mine, who kind of tracks these things, who works in finance said that, I'm the first Native American that he knows who's been named managing director. Like, we don't have records, we don't kind of know who may have been in this position before. And so I think, at Wells Fargo, we've said I'm one of the first enrolled tribal members, but, I don't think there's been anyone else before me. So
last fall, you wrote an op-ed about how Native American communities can be overlooked by investors because of lack of data. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Native American communities, tribal communities are economically invisible, right? We don't have a lot of business and economic data about them. And I think what that does is that it impacts the ability of capital to kind of flow to Indian country and to support the projects that, tribal communities need, right? For example, in 2017, NCEI issued a report that said that, Native American housing needs totaled almost $34 billion, right? And I think, the federal government has a trust responsibility to kind of to provide that funding. We certainly do our part to fund tribal governmental projects, but between us and the federal government and other banks, like, we can't supply enough capital, right, for those housing needs. So we need capital to come from other places, but we need to kind of show the opportunity. We need to use that data to show the opportunity in Indian country, right? And I think when we're able to do that, I think we'll start to get the, all the goods and services that we always talk about, more stores, more banks, more things like that to kind of come into our communities and give us the services that we all need. So that was the intent behind that op-ed.
We know that there is already a discrepancy in the kinds of data that is collected about tribal nations. In your opinion, what kinds of critical and essential data needs to be collected?
First, I think we need to kind of collect data in a way that respects the confidentiality of individual tribes, right? I think we want to make sure that we don't give folks who don't always support tribes information and put out information that they may use in a way that harms tribal communities. So we're not advocating for tribes to kind of share their confidential data, but what we are asking and encouraging tribal leaders to think about is, how can we share information and data about the industries that tribes are operating in, right? NIGC publishes gaming revenue data that got published last week. On an annual basis, and they're showing that tribal casinos generate $40.9 billion in revenue last year. If we could do that for all the other industries that tribes operate in, and then maybe put it into a pilot economic report, I think that would kind of get a lot of investors' interest, right? Because I think what they'll see is that tribes are real and legitimate businesses, right? They're real markets to operate in. And I think as a lender in this space, like we know that tribal borrowers are good credit. They're good credits, but they're good borrowers, right? And so if we can get more of this data out that kind of frames the opportunity in Indian country, I think we can get more of that capital, more of that financing to kind of flow into our communities and help with all the products that we need and help the businesses that, are eager to support the development of the tribal economies.
Something that I'm hearing from you is that there needs to be more Native Americans in these kinds of banking spaces. But where does one even begin in their journey to enter this kind of work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it needs to start pretty early, right? I think it kind of needs to start, at home. I mean, as a kid in Rosebud, I mean, part of the message I heard as a kid is go to law school, right? Go to law school, be an attorney, and help your tribe, right? And part of what I talk to students about is like you can help your tribe, but you can do it from a business perspective, right? Tribes of all financial profiles like need finance people, right? Whether you're a really successful gaming tribe or a tribe in a more remote area, I think we need people who have that background, who understand our communities, who want to live in those communities, right? Because I think in rural communities you have this issue of trying to attract talent, to work, for our businesses. And so, we need to kind of help them understand, like, you can help tribal governments, tribal businesses, through finance and business. And I think those are messages that, we need to all start telling Native youth that, there's a lot of different ways that you can help our communities. And one of them is through business and finance.
You've worked with Wells Fargo to rebuild its program on Native American communities. If you had to pick a single success that you've been most proud of, what would it be?
The report that we issued last fall, the Tribal Economic Resiliency Report, I think for me represented was kind of a big accomplishment. One, because it was the first time like a major bank has ever kind of done a research report on Indian country, and to me that's like so surprising, right? I mean, we have so many banks that kind of work in tribal communities, and to kind of get the support to do that kind of project, like for me, was just really fulfilling, right? Because the report itself like went into how tribes can become more economically resilient. And, I think that was a really powerful, is a really powerful kind of example for me, or accomplishment. I think a related accomplishment has been kind of this discussion around tribal data, right? We hosted a convening last November in conjunction with the Aspen Institute, and brought together a bunch of tribal leaders, policymakers, natives who work in the private sector, tribal organizations, and we all got together and started talking about the need for more business and economic data. And people loved it. I mean, there's a lot of sensitivities around this issue, but we were able to talk about it in the NAFOA conference in April, at NCEI in June. And we're talking about reconvening again this fall to kind of talk about next steps and what we can do. So for me, those are probably the two big things that I consider big accomplishments.
Role models are a critical part of success. Tell us about some of the role models that have shaped your life and career.
Yeah, I would say, when I think about this journey, right, and I was thinking about it before we started, I think a lot about the people who helped me get here, right? And I think about a lot of our leaders, and I remember when I started in finance, there weren't a lot of role models. There still aren't a lot of role models, and I think about, I was just that Wheatland, and I've been thinking a lot about the women who kind of had an impact on my life, and for me as a young banker, Eloise Colbell and Wilma Mankiller were big mentors of mine, right? When I wanted to quit, there were a couple of times when I wanted to quit because, it was hard, right? And I think the culture of Wall Street where I worked and the way that I grew up didn't always align, but, Wilma Mankiller and Eloise both encouraged me to, stay in it. They told me like Indian country needed me and people liked me in these roles. And Eloise used to say, we're going to need a CEO at Native American Bank, right? So it was like encouragement like that I think really helped me stay the course, and is probably a big reason why I'm here, right? Just the mentoring and encouragement of our elders is played such a big role in my life, and it also kind of reminds me that like I'm in that position now, right? I need to kind of encourage those youth, and so it's something that I try to do. And but I just wanted to acknowledge all those folks like that who support all of us in our careers, right? Like we probably wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them.
Well, Dawson, thank you so much for your time today.
Great, thanks for having me.
ICT's Stuart Huntington traveled to New York recently for a story on Indigenous canoeists who are retracing river routes that were the continent's original highways. Take a look.
They started paddling in May on the Penobscot River in Maine's Penobscot Nation and plan to complete their journey right back there in September, after passing through native lands all along their way through New York, up the Hudson River into Quebec, and then back down the Penobscot. At a stop in the Shinnecock Nation, Onondaga citizen Hickory Edwards said the trip is much more than mere aquatic adventure.
The world needs unity, and that's really what we're doing, is uniting these nations all the way down from Penobscot territory, all the way down the coast into Shinnecock, and then up into my lands. We got Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, that we're all united through these flowing waters. I believe that it's important for us to start relearning these highways.
And spreading wisdom. Shinnecock citizen Shanae Bullock helped guide the paddlers through her nation's waterways.
Out there behind us is the Atlantic Ocean. There's a small piece of land there, and there's the Atlantic Ocean on the other side. And here is what's called the Shinnecock Bay. Our people have been living here since time immemorial on this bay. This bay is very much a part of our genetic makeup. We understand that she's alive. And when you come up to Shinnecock, you can swim and still see your feet, because we shellfish and we take care of the land underneath the water. And that's just our everyday life. If the world really could spend the time to be guided through our homelands and through our waterways to see how we live, to see what we did, they would truly understand, how to do that properly.
And above all, respect the water.
There's the one element that remains constant, that life cannot exist without it, and that's water. And that water makes up, roughly 75% of us, and that water that's in us right now is that same water that was here in the beginning of time. It's been recycled over and over in the clouds, in the ground, in every blade of grass. It's been in our grandparents, our great-great-grandparents, thousands of years ago, and it's in us now, that same exact water. And that's why it's important to, keep these waters alive, because they are us. They are our grandfathers. They are our future.
Edwards, who spends a lot of his time learning, living, and teaching traditional canoe culture, considers himself first and foremost a water protector.
One of the reasons why I start becoming a water protector is coming on these waters and seeing directly firsthand the sickness on these waters. We have all these pollutants that come in where some places where we can't swim. In my own lands, Onondaga Lake is one of the most polluted lakes in the world.
At Standing Rock, he made a lasting contribution.
I grabbed the tree from the Cannonball River and dug a hole, stuck it in there, and it sat there for a week, with pieces of wood and nails, and asked people where they're from and then how many miles to home. We had people from Iceland, Greenland, far away as Australia. In the Smithsonian at National Museum of the American Indian got word that it was there, and reached out, and I said that I made it and that I could save it and rescue it from being demolished and bulldozed over, and they agreed. So I went out for my 5th time out to Standing Rock and rescued that mile marker pole and donated it to the museum.
Today, Edwards is back out on the water as the great canoe journey, stroke by stroke, moves towards its return to the Penobscot Nation. Along the way, they stopped at the Unkashog Nation on Long Island, where Chief Harry Wallace greeted them and honored them, and perhaps best summed up the journey's message of connection and regeneration.
Greetings, my friend, and relatives. My name is Harry Wallace, Giwase Inini in my language, which means hunter man. I'm a Turtle Clan, and I'm the elected chief of the Unkachog Indian Nation, and we are here on our land, which is called Puspatuk, which means the place where the waters burst forth. This village has been in our possession for over 1,000 years. We've never relinquished control or jurisdiction to anybody here, and we're here to celebrate and honor the voyage of our relatives who are traveling by water. It is a voyage that has taken place for thousands of years. The original waterways were the original highways of America, and so what this journey is doing is reaffirming our territorial jurisdiction over our water. And we are honored to be a part of this celebration and proud and honored to be a part of this journey.
In the Unkachog Nation, Stuart Huntington, ICT News.
High blood pressure is a concern for anyone, but when you're pregnant, it can be especially alarming. High blood pressure in expectant mothers can result in preeclampsia. It's a hypertension disorder that usually begins after 20 weeks of pregnancy in women whose blood pressure has been normal. If left untreated, it can lead to serious and even fatal complications for both the mother and the baby. While there is no cure for the disorder, creating awareness through shared experiences can empower mothers to be with life-saving knowledge and the courage to speak up if they feel something is wrong.
My name is Mona Nojakam, and I'm from Taos Pueblo, New Mexico. Being a mom is everything to me. It's such an important role. It's such a sacred role, especially as Native people, especially as Taos Pueblo people, as Potawatomi people, that it's our responsibility to teach our children who we are and how important that is, and that they're able to understand who they are and carry on those traditions and values and customs and cultures. We've had conversations for a long time and just kind of discussing what family could look like. That was just a really important piece to us, to be intentional about it and really create kind of that sacred space to invite a child and call them down from the stars, because that's kind of how we look at it, as a very sacred being whenever children are invited into our family and they want to come to our family. And that was really important to me, to try and incorporate those traditional birth practices, some traditional teachings into that, because that's definitely gotten lost. I decided to go with the midwifery route. I really seeked out the wisdom and experience of a doula, in that Taos Pueblo doula provided so much information to me that nobody else really knew. I had a normal pregnancy for the most part. It's really difficult to decipher what's normal in pregnancy and what's not, because you'll read lots of different things, and even just talking to folks, they'll say, oh, that's normal, when maybe it necessarily isn't normal. At about 41 weeks, I noticed that I was experiencing extreme swelling that kind of happened very quickly in my legs, and I brought that up to my midwives, and they referred me for more testing. And I was also experiencing kind of a flutter in my chest. It was actually kind of an increased heart rate, and that's when I knew that I was experiencing symptoms of preeclampsia, and that I did have high blood pressure as well as protein in my urine. I felt that something wasn't right. They would need to induce me that night. I wasn't able to pursue the home birth like I had originally planned, and as things progressed, then my blood pressure went incredibly high. And so at that point, I was unable to even move at all, and I had to just be literally on the bed. I had an emergency C-section, which brought out my baby healthy, thankfully, but I continued to have preeclampsia postpartum. Just days after having my child, I continued to have high blood pressure, and even when I was sent home, I continued to have high blood pressure. So I didn't know how to navigate this, what I was supposed to do moving forward, and Thankfully, I had my midwives that were still a part of my process. I had a kind of community of support. Otherwise, I don't know how I would have gone through that. My husband was amazing. He's always incredibly supportive of me. And I really rely and lean on my in-laws a lot because we're really close to them. I'm so happy and thankful that I had my husband right beside me throughout this entire process to really help me think through what was happening, as well as be an advocate for me too. Trust yourself. You are the expert of yourself, of your body, of your experience. And because you're the expert, you have the ability and the knowledge to really advocate for yourself. And if somebody's not listening to you, then talking to somebody else and saying, this doesn't feel right, and understanding the power and the strength that you have, that you can advocate for yourself in order to get, the equitable care that you deserve and you should have.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.